I don't see anybody. Should I? Okay. So hello all, welcome to the Mine, Yours, Mine, oh that's me. Moje, tvoje, naše, Mine, Yours, Ours, thank you, festival and its discursive program. Today we will be looking at the history of sugar. In the mid-1980s, Sidney Mintz writes his seminal book Sweetness and Power, in which he looks at an individual consumer product, sugar, and how this product connected the world and supported the development of capitalism by relying on slave labor. The conference, Sugar Everywhere, relies on contributions by several artists from the exhibition Sugar of the East, which was curated by FERENC GRÓF, and the contributions by several researchers whom we have met either through Margarete and Anton from Rotor, like Dale, TOMICH, and Kolja Abramski, or through our own research on coloniality in the peripheries like Catherine Baker. The participants in the conference will, through their contributions, help create a specific itinerary, taking us through this large and wide subject matter. In the first panel, we have Dale, TOMICH, and FERENC GRÓF. They will map the long travel of sugarcane from Far East to where the plant originated, to the Caribbean, and then to Europe. As well as look at the original maps that assisted the logistics of production based on slave labor in the Caribbean, and much more. But you will hear soon. In the second panel, Catherine Baker, Margarete Markovec, and Anton Lederer from Rotor and Focus Grupa, which is Elvis Krstulovic and myself, will look at the implementation of sugar industry in the peripheries of the colonial Europe and the new relations that come out of sugar beet production. In the third panel, which will not be today, this will be tomorrow at noon, you will hear Kolja Abramski, Ilona Nemet, and Graciela Carnevale, who will talk more about contemporary sugar struggles related to work from the mid-20th century until today. As you hear, the talks will be in English. They are recorded and streamed, and joining us in Filodrammatica today on this hybrid conference, we have actually participants from 3 continents. This hybridity is in some sense great, but the other is, you will hear Dale TOMICH will be recorded. He will join us later live, but he, in the time zone misunderstanding, it came out that he's having a talk on the radio at the same time, but he will join us later. I will introduce shortly Dale first, and then later Ferenc. So Dale TOMICH is Emeritus Professor of Sociology at Birminghampton University, State University of New York. He is the author of Slavery in the Circuit of Sugar, Martinique in the World Economy 1830 until 1848, through Prism of Slavery, Labor, Capital, and World Economy, and with Rafael Marquez, Reinaldo Funes, and Carlos Venegas, the book that just recently came out, Reconstructing the Landscapes of Slavery, a visual history of the plantation in the 19th century Atlantic world. So we will hear Dale speaking now.
Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be here. I'd like to thank Eva and Elvis for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. And as some of you already know, it's a special event for me because my grandparents left for America from Rijeka at the beginning of the 20th century. And my grandmother worked there at 14 years old for a year making cigars to earn her passage. So for me, this clearly emotionally closes the circle. So thank you. I'm really happy to be here. In his book, Sweetness and Power, anthropologist Sidney Mintz traces the long and complex history and geography of the West's engagement with sugar and shows us the multiple forms in which it has satisfied the almost biological human desire for sweetness. In its commodity form, where, when, and how sugar is produced, and the almost infinite variety of ways in which it can be consumed make a fascinating lens through which to trace the historical development of capitalism. I want to focus on the 19th century, when sugar first became an item of modern mass consumption. We may trace the origins of the expansion of the world sugar market during the 19th century to the age of revolutions. US independence and the Haitian Revolution destroyed the colonial system in the Atlantic. Latin American independence replaced imperial rule in Spanish America with a proliferation of independent states. At the same time, Britain became the dominant industrial, political, and maritime power in the world. Underlying these political, economic changes, population growth, urbanization, and industrialization increased the demand for sugar and diversified the ways in which it was consumed. And that's not moving. It stopped. Okay. Sorry. Between 1815 and the 1880s, there was a cycle of dramatic expansion and restructuring of the world sugar market. This expansion took two forms. Europe witnessed the expansion of beet sugar production. Beet sugar had been promoted by Napoleon as a substitute for tropical cane sugar during Britain's blockade of the continent. The cultivation of beet sugar could be integrated into existing patterns of crop rotation, and the technical characteristics of the sugar beet and its relatively low sucrose content stimulated technological innovations in sugar manufacture. Northern France and Belgium became centers for the manufacture of sugar milling and refining machinery. Britain and the US soon followed. During the course of the century, beet sugar production expanded across the European continent, generally as part of projects intended to protect and develop national economies from the domination of British capital and British efforts to control the supply of tropical cane sugar to continental Europe. In the Atlantic, extensive new frontiers of slave commodity production surpassed the old colonial zones of sugar production. These new frontiers developed as part of the creation of an industrial division of labor and a competitive world market. In them, nature and slave labor were reorganized and combined with new industrial technologies from the beet sugar industry to create new zones of sugar plantation monoculture that produced on an unprecedented scale. The formation of new sugar frontiers in the Americas, including not only Cuba, which I'll talk about today, but also Puerto Rico, Louisiana, and Guyana, among others, required extensive available land, an increase in the number of slaves and the restructuring of slave labor, and the adaptation of tropical cane sugar to the new technologies, industrial technologies of the beet sugar industry. The radical restructuring of the relation between nature, slave labor, and industrial technology made Cuba the world's leading sugar producer during this period. If we look at the graphic, you can see that the beginning at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, sugar consumption or production everywhere went up dramatically. In Cuba, the blue line went up very rapidly. By the end of the 1820s, it was the world's leading sugar producer. And then its production just kept almost doubling every 10 years. So what's important is not only the scale of production, but the rate of increase. The same holds true of beet sugar. But there's a little hitch in this story that at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, beet sugar was almost wiped out in Europe because of the huge influx of tropical cane sugar. And then it revived in the 1820s, and then also increased rapidly, but under very different conditions as part of the new kind of protectionism against British industrial capital and its attempt to impose a free market on people. So what you can see is the increase in beet sugar under conditions of protection. And by the 1880s, the sugar market is really complicated because it has all sorts of legal protections and subsidies for national sugar producers. Sugar production everywhere, the gray line is going up rapidly. And Cuba, which has, Spain is not an effective mother country to protect it. Cuba has to insert itself into a competitive world market, which puts additional pressure on it to modernize, to increase and expand and modernize its production. And in the end, Cuba's main consumer was the United States. So it redrew the map of the Atlantic sugar market and made the US a huge Cuba connection extremely important very early on. Cuba became the world's largest sugar producer in the world in the late 1820s and nearly doubled its production every 10 years. The extraordinary growth of sugar production was possible because Cuba had access to a virtually unlimited area of cultivated land that was well suited to sugar cultivation. It had exceptional access to a supply of slave labor and the conditions to adopt new industrial technologies of production and transport. Beginning in 1818, powerful steam grinding mills were introduced in Cuba and used together with open kettle boiling of the sugar syrup to create semi-mechanized sugar mills. In 1837, the railroad was introduced into Cuba, and by the 1840s, the triple effect vacuum pan used to convert the syrup into sugar appeared in Cuba, and fully mechanized mills began to develop. By 1860, there were 1,068 sugar mills cultivating over 15 million hectares of sugar in the sugar zone of Cuba. Of these, 829 used steam-powered mills, and 64 were giant, fully mechanized mills, and these 64 mills accounted for 15% of Cuba's total production. The incorporation of each technical innovation required larger plantations with greater capital investment, more land, and more slaves in order to be efficient and profitable. As new milling and refining technologies developed in the course of the 19th century, Cuban planters could move further into the interior and build larger plantations with more slaves in order to take advantage of the new technology. Between 1801 and 1866, over 640,000 enslaved Africans were forcibly transported to Cuba, despite British attempts to suppress the transatlantic slave trade. The great majority of these were destined for work in the sugar mills. What I'd like to point out is this whole development of Cuba is taking place at a time when people have traditionally thought that slavery in the Americas was in decline and slavery was incompatible with industrial capital. In fact, the transatlantic slave trade between 1820 and 1850 was the highest it ever was in its history, except that the slaves that were transported almost exclusively went either to Cuba or to Brazil to work in the Brazilian coffee production, which had a history very analogous to the Cuban sugar industry. So the time that it's dying, what I'd like to show you here is really, this is a peak of slave production, and it's an industrial kind of slavery. It didn't last the whole century, but it's really an important feature of how we understand slavery and how this what I call the second slavery contributed to what came after, after slavery, the kinds of free labor plantation arrangements in the Americas and elsewhere in the tropical world. I also would like to emphasize that what sugar did to nature and the environmental consequences of the development of the sugar belt in Cuba. During the 17th and 18th centuries in Cuba, Cuba was the center of Spanish shipbuilding, and the forest was under the control of the Department of Navy, the Navy. So if you look at the slide on the right from 1816, at the beginning of the sugar boom, you see the green, most of the island was tropical rainforest or one or another variety of forest under control of the Navy. And it was forbidden to cut down trees. The trees were used for shipbuilding. That's why Cuba was an open space to develop this new kind of industrial slavery producing sugar. Before the sugar boom, the main agricultural activity in the interior was raising wild pigs and wild cattle that didn't threaten the trees. At the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, the Spanish crown granted Cubans the absolute right to private property and land, including the right to cut down trees. The creation of the Cuban sugar frontier entailed the destruction of the tropical forest and the progressive conversion of the land into an extensive zone of sugar monoculture. The wood was used for construction or just burned up as fuel for the sugar mills. The railroad was crucial for the expansion of the Cuban sugar industry. The further the plantations were from the ports, the more important was cheap transportation provided by the railroads. Railroad construction in Cuba began in 1837 and opened, which is 14 years after the first railroad in Britain, and opened the interior of the island to the cultivation of sugarcane. By 1861, there were nearly 1,300 kilometers of rail line in operation, all closely associated with the sugar industry. The railroad itself promoted the increase in scale of sugar production. The more distant zone, as the railroad reached into more distant zones, more sugar had to be produced to guarantee full cargoes for the railroad. This map, Jose de la Torre's 1857 map of Cuba's railroad network, coincides exactly with the sugar zone, and the projected lines of expansion of the railroad, the dotted lines on the map, coincide with the projected expansion of sugar production. The railroad was built by and for the sugar industry in Cuba. The plantations were built in close proximity to the railroad lines that carried their produce to giant warehouses in the ports of Havana and Matanzas, among the first structures in the Americas to build with structural iron, where it was loaded directly onto ocean-going ships with giant cranes. The map also indicates the telegraph lines. Through the telegraph communications network, merchants in Philadelphia and New York could receive information about the coming crop from their agents, and planters even in the most distant plantations had information about sugar prices. The sugar market began to form well before the harvest of the crop. The most important aspect of the map, however, was the new conception of space that it embodies. It not only gives the distance between stations, but the time as well. If you look at the bottom of the grid, you see at the bottom of the map, the part that's set off, it gives the time between each station on the railroad line. This map transforms Cuba into an abstract time-space grid by means of which the movements of goods and people could be constantly calculated in terms of time, speed, distance, and price. Sugar engineer Eduardo Laplante's lithograph of the interior of the San Martin sugar mill depicts a fully mechanized mill. It's virtually a completely automated process. Noteworthy in the image is the extremely powerful, high compression 40 horsepower steam grinding mill in the two sets of triple effect vacuum pans manufactured by the French firm of De Roon and Kai. The mill is on the far left of the picture, and it's the cane is fed into the mill by huge conveyor belts, and the stalks that are left after grinding are carried away by other conveyor belts. In previous artisanal systems, this had been done by hand and was extremely dangerous work because slaves would get their arms caught in the between the grinding wheels. Now, this is a massive quantity of cane that's processed very rapidly. Once the juices or syrup is separated from the cane, there's a system of pumps and gravity feeds that take it through a system of filters, which are the devices on the platform to the right of the mill, where impurities in the juice are filtered out. Then they're pumped into the triple effect vacuum pans. The triple effect vacuum pans are the 6 large cylindrical objects in the middle. So that here the juice is cooked in a vacuum at a low temperature. Because it's a vacuum and the temperature is low, the quality of the sugar is much higher, and they're able to get much more sugar from the same quantity of juice. The triple effect is important because the steam from the evaporation of the first vacuum pan heats the second, and the second heats the third. So it's a great saving in fuel that way. But the quantity of sugarcane that you need to make one of these effective and profitable is huge, as we'll see in a minute. So these, once they start, they have to operate continuously, and they consume massive quantities of cane and produce massive amounts of sugar. So this mill is exceptional because it has 2 sets of vacuum, triple effect vacuum cans, so 6 altogether. So as we'll see, by the end, the quantity of sugar they're producing is absolutely enormous. Once the sugar is crystallized, it's taken to the next step is the steam operated things at the lower right, which are they're called centrifuges. There's barrels that spin around and separate the remaining juice from the crystallized sugar. After that, the remaining sugar is taken up to the drying platform in the upper right and placed into the cones, which, if you've read Ilona's Eastern Sugar, are very familiar to you. The cones drain the last remaining syrup from the sugar. But unlike the Ilona's Eastern Sugar example, in Cuba, once the sugar is crystallized and comes out of the cones, it's crushed and put into very large boxes to facilitate railroad transportation. So this whole operation is fully automated almost. And here slaves become pretty much machine tenders. But the interesting thing is the work is in fact done by slaves in large part with technicians and supervisors to make sure that, to take care of the machinery. So the scale of production in the mill affected the organization of the fields. The physical characteristics of the sugarcane plant impose an economy of time on its production. The growing season for cane is 18 months. The cane has to be cut, ground into syrup, and the syrup has to be boiled into crystallized sugar once the impurities are removed from it. These operations have to be performed in sequence, simultaneously and continuously, in order to obtain the final product. Remember, once the mill starts, the vacuum pans, they can't stop. In fact, in Cuba, Sunday, which was officially a day of rest, was the day they had to stop to clean the machines. It wasn't every Sunday. It could be 2 or 3 weeks before the day of rest came. This process requires careful coordination of land, labor, and machinery as the material moves from solid to liquid and back to solid. The mill had to operate continuously and required an enormous amount of cane. An equilibrium had to be maintained between each sector of production. No more cane can be cut than can be ground. No more syrup can be produced than can be boiled into crystallized sugar. So it both affects how the particular operations are carried out, but it also means that it affects technological innovation, because if you introduce a steam mill or a vacuum pan, you have to increase everything else proportionally, or it doesn't have any positive effect on production. The spatial organization of the Cuban sugar mill integrates agriculture and manufacturing in a single continuous operation. As the capacity of the factory grew, the integration of agriculture and manufacturing became increasingly complex. A greater quantity of cane had to be processed, and the fields were further from the mill. Sugar production required careful planning based on measurement and calculation of space, time, and the quantity of material. And the activities of often hundreds of enslaved workers throughout the process over the course of many months had to be coordinated with it. The map of La Merced sugar mill registers the elaborate geometry of the cane fields and served as an instrument to visually control the landscape and labor. It enabled planters to plan and execute the entire production process over the course of the crop cycle. The mill, the refinery, slave barracks, and other buildings form a manufacturing and residential nucleus at the center of the plantation, so that the fields are as close as possible to the factory. This is the pink rectangles in the center are the mill and the residential nucleus. Diagonal roads are cut through the cane fields to facilitate the rapid movement of workers from the fields to the mill, and from the workers to the fields, and of the cane to the mill. If you look closely in each direction, in each corner of the central complex, you see a diagonal road moving out to the edge of the plantation. The fields are subdivided into plots that correspond to the amount of cane that can be cut by a slave gang in a day. Each plot is numbered so that all activity is calculable. The table at the right of the map records the size of each plot and the amount of cane that it typically yields. The map permitted calculation of the amount of cane available per day over the entire harvest season, the distance from field to mill, and the time necessary to transport it. At the lower right of the map, no, sorry, that's not there, different map. Okay, good. Slavery in Cuba lasted long enough, unfortunately, for there to be a photographic record. Charles de Forest Fredericks photographed sugar mills in the late 1850s as part of an album of Cuban scenes that he prepared for sale in the US market. During the harvest, ox carts carried the cut cane from the fields to the factory. The ox carts depicted in the image demonstrate how measurement, calculation, and standardization integrated the diverse processes of production on the Cuban plantation. In the photo, cane stalks are cut to a uniform length, and the size of the carts themselves is also standardized. The cart load became the unit of measurement for the entire operation. The various phases of production were integrated with one another by calculations based on the number of carts. Calculation of the quantity of cane cut and the time required to transport the cane from the field to the mill determined the movement of the carts. The circulation of the carts was carefully planned using estate maps like the Merced map we've just seen. in order to ensure that the mill was continuously supplied with the proper amount of cane. On some plantation, gangs of workers were even assigned to carts rather than to fields, and the harvest took on some of the aspects of the modern assembly line. The slaves had to have the cane cut and ready when each cart appeared. Through the quantified integration of the production process, the labor in the fields was subjected to a strict industrial timeless discipline determined by the demands of the mill. Eduardo Laplante's depiction of the Echeverria mill captures the dynamic character of the Cuban sugar frontier and the new conception of time and space that characterized the agro-industrial landscape of Cuba. Laplante portrays the integration of production on two neighboring sugar mills under common ownership. Echeverria is the one in the front, and in the back is the San Martin mill that you've already seen the interior of. The San Martin mill is also the photograph at the very beginning of the presentation. An internal railroad 2 miles long connects the two mills, and they operated as a single unit. Laplante calls attention to the continuous line of ox carts bringing cane from the fields to the mill in the foreground, and to the proximity of both mills to the nearby rail line that goes to the port on the right side of the mill. You can see the locomotive going down the rail line. Echeverria in the foreground had a large steam-powered mill and used multiple open kettle systems called trains to boil down the sugar. This was a very old technology. If you didn't have a vacuum, couldn't afford a vacuum pan, you boiled the sugar down in open kettles, which is required a lot of skill and a lot of artisanal knowledge to produce. And as the mills, if you look at 18th century sugar mills, they commonly had 1 or 2 sets of kettles to boil the sugar. The Cuban mills, the semi-mechanized Cuban mills that had steam-powered grinding mills and used open kettle boiling would often have 4 or 6 or 8 or even 10 sets of kettles to handle the huge quantity of syrup that was produced. So it became much more complex, but it was cheaper than buying a vacuum pan. Not all planters could afford it, but so the semi-mechanized mill using steam power to grind the cane in open kettles was the most common. And then the giant fully mechanized mills like San Martin were the much more efficient and modern and automated producers, but both made up the modernized Cuban sugar sector. San Martin in the background had a 40 horsepower high compression steam powered mill with 2 sets of triple vacuum pans built by Daron and Kai, as we've already seen. In addition, another rail line ran from the interior of the San Martin mill to the nearby railroad siding to load the sugar onto the train to the port. Together, the two plantations had 1,360 hectares of land planted in sugarcane and a labor force of 989 slaves and Chinese contract laborers. By the end of the sugar cycle, the supply of new African slaves was drying up, and contracting Chinese laborers to supplement the slaves became more common. This combined mill produced over 4,500 metric tons of sugar annually. This is another fully mechanized mill called Flor de Cuba. You can see on the right the mill and the manufacturing plant. In the center, the planter's house with a kind of interesting fortified tower next to it, a building to store materials. And in the back, you can see let me go back. You can also see it here. That as the scale of production got bigger and there were more and more slaves, what happened on the big Cuban plantations was that slaves were housed in barracks. And you can see on the right here, the slave barracón or barracks where slaves lived in individual cells. Next to it is the overseer's house. Typically, Cuban planters lived in Havana and took the train to their plantations, and they weren't resident on the plantation. But the barracks are important for controlling the labor force. In the morning, they all live in cells that face in the interior. The structure in the middle is a cooking kitchen to feed them, sort of mass production cafeteria. Then the slaves could be assembled, given their tools, and marched out the single door under supervision to go to where they were assigned for their daily tasks. Here we see the same thing in the back of the Flor de Cuba image, with the building in the middle of you see the many doors of this enclosed structure, which are the slave cells or cabins or apartments. On the outside is the housing of the free staff, the overseers, the mechanics, the people who did certain qualified work in the mill. And also what I'm looking at, I don't know how to point here, there's this alley going down between the mill and this other set of buildings. The lower, at the top, I think, are the housing for the skilled free workers. And at the bottom is the housing for the Chinese indentured workers. So everything is segregated and organized in terms of control, accounting, keeping people in a proper place at a proper time. And then in the center is the kitchen, which had a fully automated steam kitchen, which I'm sure cooked marvelous cuisine. Could feed 500 people in 45 minutes. And on top of that is an infirmary for the slaves. So the last two images are interesting because they're the biggest sugar mills, but they signal the end of the this cycle of the sugar expansion, this sugar commodity frontier. By the end of the 1860s, the expansion of the sugar frontier came to an end. The sheer size of the sugar mill, the enormous amount of capital invested in machinery, and the cost of transportation as you went further and further into the interior and farther from the ports, made further expansion into the interior impractical. At this point, planters became increasingly interested in agronomy, soil science, and the use of fertilizer as the means to increase the amount of cane cultivated. This plantation had a 53 horsepower steam engine, a triple effect vacuum pan, 500 hectares planted in cane, 400 slaves and 170 Chinese indentured workers, and produced 300 metric tons of sugar per year. So thank you.
So Dale is not with us yet, so we will go with FERENC and have questions for both FERENC and Dale after FERENC's presentation. I will just introduce you in a few words. You can please. Ferenc GRÓF is a graduate of a Hungarian University of Arts Budapest, and since 2012 he has taught at the ENSA in Bourges. His work considers ideological footprints at the intersection of graphic design and spatial experience. He is a founding member of the Parisian cooperative Société Réaliste that worked from 2004 until 2015. The work of Société Réalistes considers questions of contemporary political representations and text-based interventions. Société Réalistes' work has also been included in numerous solo and group exhibitions and biennials such as Shanghai, Lyon, Istanbul, and so on. Since 2015, Ferenc GRÓF continues his work as an individual artist. He has recently exhibited in the exhibitions like Without Index in Kicheli Museum, Budapest, X with a dot below at the Off Biennale in 2007, also in Budapest, or Firing of a Red Star Alert in ACB Gallery, Budapest, and so on. Ferenc lives in Paris. Please.
Thanks a lot, Eva, for the introduction. So so first of all, just because they all mentioned the name of Ilona Németh, I started to work around sugar because of Ilona Németh, who is coming from a small city in Slovakia, Dunajská Streda, where there was a sugar factory, Eastern Sugar. I won't go into the details of her project, for a very long and detailed research project. She'll be with us tomorrow. But it was the beginning for a 3-year research program with several institutions. You can check all the history of this Eastern Sugar project on the website. Here you can see all the participants, the institutions from the Kunsthalle Slovak National Gallery from Bratislava, Futura, Prague, La Box, and the art school ENSAF from Bourges, France, where I teach for a while. Rotor Graz, Schafhof, Freising, and yeah, the Kunsthalle in Bratislava. So, just to situate the city Bourges on a map, you can see that it's a city in the very center of France, very near to sugar beet production sites. Here on this map, you can see that sugar in crisis. Sugar is always in crisis. For me, the most interesting thing in this whole research about sugar, it could have been a lot of other products. You know, the most common metaphor about sugar is that it was the petrol of the 18th century. So since the 18th century, it was a basic commodity of from the beginning of the extraction economy, which continues to flow and to, as Dale explained, doubling the production every 10 years, and we continue in that scale. But it's still a commodity of global capitalism. So, of course, like how richness is created through destruction and exploitation. This is the main thing which is behind all these numbers. Very basically, like just very simple examples. If you think about Tate Modern, etc. in London, behind that you've got the sugar barons, Tate and Lye. All these huge richness which was created, or with this 3 year, you will see during my presentation as well. During these 3 years of research, we arrived to to map the production. we would like to continue this because, which will be very interesting. So we could trace all these the sites of production, modalities of production, of course, with the colonial period, the slavery, and how these structures were organized, which is still missing for me for my work as well. This is this question of tracing the profit, how this richness was then, which was created during this very long period of slavery and colonialism, how it was transformed and how it is used even today, how it is still in movement. So tracing the profit, it will be like the next step. But now I will just show you some pictures how we started to work around sugar. So Ilona came to Bourges just before the pandemic in March 2020. So we had the chance to visit some sugar factories near the city of Bourges. This, as you could see on the map, we went up to the north, and we could visit some important sugar factories. And with the students, we started to work on in the frame of the workshop on a kind of a global map and trying to gather the more and more information. It was really the very beginning of this research period. And as I'm not a curator at all, but I was, let's say, put in this role in the frame of this project, and when we prepared this exhibition at La Box, at the gallery of our school, we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to show, or I wanted to show the photographic archive of Ilona. Ilona Németh documented all these ruins of the abandoned sugar factories all around Slovakia, and she created this mobile structure. Here you can see that all these images could move. There were like 38 photographic images about these abandoned factories. So I was pretty sure that this work must be shown, and yes, but how to talk about this very specific post-socialist period in the middle of France? And actually, it was Cuba. They all was talking about Cuba. It was Cuba which helped me to create a kind of a historical link to the colonial times, keeping the questions of socialist production. So I found this a little bit lesser known movie of Chris Marker, which you can see at the exhibition, Drugo as well. So this film of Chris Marker from 1970, The Battle for the 10 Million, which is like a 1-hour movie about the great Zafra. The Zafra is the collecting sugarcane, the sugarcane harvest. Fidel Castro launched this campaign to produce 10 million tons of sugar in one campaign, of course, to boost the Cuban economy, which was in crisis, in constant crisis. This film starts with Castro in a television studio in front of the map of Cuba, and he explained for the television viewers that everything is going well with the Zafra. There are only problems. There are only some problems emerging from Oriente, in the east of the country. So I said, okay, perfect. Now we've got the problem. It's coming always from the east. This will be a good starting point, and from that I could start to put together this exhibition, linking the the history of Cuba, colonialism, slavery, to the contemporary problems of sugar production. So for this exhibition, instead of a curatorial text, I was just unable to produce a correct curatorial text. I worked on this map that you can see on the screen, which is a quite complex diagram and a world map of production. So again, it was like, it's still, even if it's very complex, it's still a kind of a starting point for something to continue this research project. So you can see that this map can be divided in two main parts, with the word map and this diagram with downstairs. I will show you quickly like the details of this map, and it will happen to understand a little bit the data and the figures behind. Excuse me. So first of all, this whole story, as Dea mentioned as well in his presentation, this whole story is a tale of these two plants. I gave it as a title of this map, from plants to plantations, from plantations to plants, plants in the sense of factories or industrial sites. So these two plants, sugar beet and sugar cane. So in one of the corners of this map, we can see all these in the industrial processes, how sugar is extracted and transformed to this commodity sugar and the other products. The third work that I knew that I wanted to show in the exhibition was this lithography that I could buy on eBay for 20 euros. This caricature of Daumier, Honoré Daumier, a French artist, from 1839, which was published in Le Charivari, a satirical journal of that period. During that time, during this month of 1839, in Charivari, Honoré Daumier published several caricatures about this battle, ongoing battle between sugar beet, so the continental European sugar and the colonial sugar. And this you can see in the exhibition too. So this story really works around the dialectics of these and the battles of these two plants. I use a very basic color code, green for the beet and this light blue for the sugar cane. And here there is a very basic diagram where this pivotal point is in the history of sugar, and not only, but like global capitalism is illustrated. It's this period at the end of the 18th century. So the end of this period when sugar was the petrol, which ended with the Haitian Revolution. Haiti was called before that the first successful slave revolution, Saint-Domingue. It was the French colony, slave island, and basically this island was producing almost 70% of the world sugar. Sugar. And after this period of revolution, which was a very complicated story, and came the Napoleonic Wars with the Continental Blockade. There was mentioning that as well. So the continental Europe was cut off from the sugar sources, from the tropical slave produced sugar sources, and that's how sugar beet came into the game. Sugar beet, there were already some researches by agronomists and botanists in Germany and in France at that period, but it was this very precise moment when Napoleon Bonaparte give enormous money, enormous subsidy to cultivate sugar beet in France. So this is the story when it started, this, let's say, competition between these two plants. On this map, you can see the distribution of the production. So there are some countries like United States or China, where the two plants are cultivated, but basically northern Eurasia or Canada, they can cultivate only sugar beet. Now, actually, I go layer by layer of this map. So I just isolated some elements which can help to really just to trace through the logic of this thing. So in this, with this very basic timeline, you can see how sugarcane traveled from the east to the west, starting approximately in 4000 before Common Era in Papua, passing by China, India, arriving to the Middle East around the 8th century, and arriving to Madeira in around 1425. Madeira is a very important island because it was the first island where the plantation, slave-based plantation economy was experimented and created first, before arriving to the Caribbeans. Here the last date on this timeline, the very beginning of the 16th century, Hispaniola. So with the Spanish conquest of the Caribbean island, this was another step or another etap which was which started there. So on the map you can find this triangle in the very middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which symbolizes, of course, the Atlantic Triangle of the slave trade. I didn't want to talk about all the details of the slave trade. It would have been another story, but it's a very important, like, a graphic element to be incorporated. And I suggested, and you can see this kind of form all around, coming from this triangle, all around the continents, which suggests, let's say, a kind of a continuity. It's a superimposition of the very basic thing, you know, like the infinity form. Different kind of typographical forms of infinity coming from this Atlantic Triangle. And then this, from Hispaniola, 1501, we arrived to another age, the age of calories or planet plantation, and this is how we arrive on this poster to this diagram part, where I used the price line, the price the change of the price of sugar during the centuries, from the beginning of the 17th century till today, it is what we can call it in a scientific publication, artist view, because there we cannot really find exact data from and to compare these data of prices of 17th century with the US dollar based economy of today. So it's more like an illustration of the fluctuation of the price. Back then, of course, in the 17th century, it was more like, let's say, the British pound, even if it was not accepted as a global currency. But the data I could find it was mainly in British pound. But and today, of course, it's like US dollars. So it's more like an illustration of these changes from a very expensive luxury commodity, which will lose its value and becomes more available, of course, with some very important fluctuations. So already in this map, in this diagram, I wanted to underline that, let's say, more than the half of this time frame. So since the beginning of the 17th century till today, more than the half of that period was under slavery, under colonial rule. Okay, this is this part. So the abolition of slavery in Cuba happened in 1886. And here you can see, so actually, and in this diagram, which I could use as a kind of a chronology of a timeline, I could put some dates which were important for the exhibition. So there are a lot of details from the, let's say, the more or less global history of sugar, but I could include very important dates like the work of Focusgruppa. Let's say their research starts with the date of 1750, the creation of the Trieste-Rijeka privileged company of Trieste and Rijeka, which was a company specialized in sugar trade. Yeah, this is like a zoom where you can see just quickly some details, and for the part of the 20th century and today, these fluctuation of the price, it's more precise. We have much more data, much more precise data concerning the changes of the value of sugar. And here as well, I included some details like for the movie of Chris Marker, 1970, Zafra of the 10 million, or it was for 1968, Tucumán Burns, which was a very important event in political art in Rosario and Buenos Aires in Argentina, to denounce the conditions of Tucumán, the biggest sugar producing region of the country. And it ends with the dates of the research of Ilona Nemet. For example, 2006, the closing of the Dunajska Streda factory of Eastern Sugar. And I just put some other elements on the map, just really to underline this exponential development of the sugar business. So here you can see the sugar consumption per capita, which starts with not even 2 kilograms per year in the beginning of the 18th century and arriving around 80 kilograms per year in our times. Another important series of data comes from was put over on these layers. It's the production centers and the different quantity of the different products of sugar. So here, with these circles, I represented like the sugar beet, sugarcane production, sugar production, consumption, sugar import, export, and then other products which are very much linked to this product. It's like the isoglucose, which can be created actually from corn and other. I just forgot the name of this molecule anyway, which you can find in potato as well. Anyway, I forgot the name. Or ethanol, which is very important not only for human consumption but for the in the form of bioethanol as for the energy business, especially in Brazil. So this is this map, which is over. These are these circular diagrams, which are on the very last layer of the map. Yeah, and as a kind of, and I use some ornamentations as well. Yeah. So here you can see again the whole map. So as I said, I really hope that very soon I can start to work on the second part of this diagram, where the movement of money will be, of the profit will be presented as well. As I said, it's mainly about production. You know, like especially the 19th century was this period where the profit generated with sugar and slave exploitation started to go all around on every level of the European societies. For example, like just one example, as I mentioned already, Henry Tate, which is very well known. But there was a family in France, the Le Body family. And this family got extremely rich with sugar beet. So they were not at the beginning. They were not linked directly with the slave economy. So they started to work. They had sugar beet factories, sugar factories in France. Later, when they got rich enough, they bought shares in overseas plantations as well. And the second generation of the Le Body family, they became already bankers. They were less known as sugar barons. This period was a little bit over. They moved to banking, but always keeping one feet in sugar, and they participated to the creation in several banks, which exist still in France today, and then they invested massively in aviation. So they made like how it's called in English, like just like the Zeppelin, you know, like not, yeah. That's it. So I hope that very soon I can show you a second map tracing the profit. Thank you very much.
Hello. So we have both Dale and FERENC with us. Yes. And we can start with the questions. If somebody from the room would like to ask a question? Or somebody from the Zoom as well, excuse me. Is it okay that I start? Okay, so I wanted to ask Dale first in relation to his presentation. He was showing maps of, or he was showing images, visual material of utilitarian kind in a sense. And in the book, Landscapes of Slavery, the whole book starts actually with a painting and an analysis of a painting where a certain metaphorical understanding of what the slave owners who asked for the painting to be painted were thinking when they produced this image of the landscape, the bird in a cage, and money. I don't know if you would maybe be willing to tell us a bit more about this. We don't hear you. Can you please turn on the mic? I think it's you need to do it on your side.
Here we go. There. Okay. I wish I had the image to show people who haven't seen it. It's a marvelous image. The original is probably like 20 feet high, but you can convert to meters, and 15 meters across. And it's a trompe-l'oeil painting in an elegant dining room of a plantation house, as if you're looking out the window at a typical coffee landscape of Brazil. And this started our whole landscape project. In the background, you see the coffee trees planted on the hills in vertical rows as they were in Brazil, which was enormously destructive of the environment. The sides of the windows are two Corinthian columns. At the bottom, then there are representations of coffee plants close to the windows. And then at the hanging, the prominent features hanging from the window is a big bird cage with a bird in it, looking out at two butterflies that are flying free. And on the bottom of the window is a strong box with money. And it's an incredibly striking painting. The name, I can look it up, who painted it. It was painted by, I think, a Catalan painter, maybe an Italian painter, who was traveling in Brazil and painting, Jose Maria Villaronga. I can show it here, perhaps. Maybe you can see it. Wait, where's the camera? Does this show up?
Yes, maybe if you put it a bit further away so that we see the foliage.
Here, there. How's that? Best I can do, I think.
Okay, it's a bit dark, but I think...
Hang on, some more light here.
I could share it also, but I was told that that will produce echo in the room, so sorry, audience.
Okay. Well, okay, so that's roughly what it looks like. That might be better. Can you see that?
Yeah,
quick to do, I close and go away. So Villaronga painted murals in plantation houses. I think he also painted opera scenes, sets in Catalonia, I don't remember exactly. So this just was mind-boggling. What does it mean, and how do we understand it? Because it has all of the elements of the wealth of the coffee plantation there, but all symbolic, including this kind of caged birds. I think metaphorically represents slavery. looking at the free butterflies, but shows nothing of slavery. And that's true of all the slavery is hardly ever represented. So that was our question. What does this mean? And so we thought a lot about that and thought, well, we have to do something to understand the landscapes of the plantations, but also to use visual records in a different way. So our book is called A Visual History of Slavery because we didn't try to write the history of slavery. Our inspiration was John Berger's ways of seeing. And we wanted people to look at the images, and the text just kind of minimally explains the images so people can have some idea of what they're looking at. And I think by putting them all together in series, you can see a lot of interesting things about plantation landscapes and how landscapes connect labor and nature, and how they're all organized in a very rationalized way to exploit both nature and slavery to produce the crop. So part of it, the painting started us off, but then we also wanted to move away from strictly a certain kind of art historical interpretation that just looks at the image, and the image, you don't get outside of the frame. And our working assumption was a lot of images are about something. They tell us something about the landscape. They're all representations. None of them are completely true. But what can we learn by putting the landscapes together, or the images together, and reconstructing landscapes and the relations between different processes? And so the part of my presentation was showing you one strand of what we came up with, that we could look at, that the landscape representations and the maps and so forth can actually tell us a lot about what plantation slavery and sugar production was like. And I think it's important, because historians never use images very well, and they don't contextualize them. And secondly, landscape has not really been a focus of attention in histories of slavery. And so we get ecological histories as something extra, but landscape gets you right to the nexus of nature, slave labor, and the control by capital to produce the crop. And let me just say, and we thought about this in 3 levels. First, there's a botanical economy, that each crop, coffee, cotton, sugar, has its own botanical characteristics that has its own economic dimension. And the inspiration for this was Arturo Varman's book, Corn, the Bastard Child of Capitalism, about corn production. It's really quite interesting discussion. The second was the spatial economy of the plantation itself, that each plantation had a definite time-space economy that regulated what labor was and how the crop was grown. And the third dimension was the commodity frontier. Each of our choices, including Cuba, was a new space that was made in the remaking of post-industrial slavery. And what I want to just emphasize is that for so long, people have looked at slavery as archaic, as incompatible with capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're trying to show is that's not really true. That in fact, slavery in new zones, the ones we're looking at, adapted perfectly well to industrial capital. At a certain point, they could no longer continue for a variety of reasons, and not just the alleged inefficiency of slavery. And that takes us to a new terrain of what happens after slavery and what's the connection with other forms of compulsory labor that followed slavery around the world. So my colleague Rafael Marchesi is talking about, he's now writing about coffee in Brazil, in Java, at the end of slavery in Brazil, and in post-slavery Java. And I'm going back the other way to the 16th century. So the idea is this can open up a new way of looking at a lot of different things. So is that kind of do it for you, Eva, or?
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay.
More than I expected. Thank
More
you.
than you wanted, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
No. More than I expected. Thank you very much. Do we have other questions from the room?
Hello.
Zoom, because they have
Something
sound.
with the Zoom is not okay.
There's no sound.
Yeah, wait a second. I'm gonna just continue making
does this say?
sounds. Hello. Do you hear me now? Do you hear me now? No.
I also have no sound.
No sound?
And your microphone?
Do you hear from this mic?
No?
No.
Can you hear me call you?
Yeah,
No.
we hear you.
Yes, okay, I can't hear him.
Do you hear me now? Whoa. Yeah, I'm speaking.
I didn't get the punchline of the question.
Yeah,
I got
yeah.
everything up to that.
Eva, maybe you can give me your mic.
Someone going to type
No,
me.
it's not working. He doesn't hear.
It's
on
the
this
last
one.
part of the sentence, question. I didn't hear anything.
Yeah, I know. I just, nothing I can do.
You can repeat if he hears you now.
Oh.
Do you hear me now? If you hear me
Globalized.
now. Do you hear me now?
Okay, we're having technical problems and solving them. Just a second, please. Thank
Okay.
you.
Can somebody...
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, let's wait for a second. Hello now? Is it better? No?
Are there any questions in the room? Or comments? Maybe to FERENC? FERENC, don't leave, please. Can I ask you, maybe in relation to your further research, and in a sense with the...
You hear me?
We hear you, Dale.
Yes, can you, in the hall, can you hear me?
We hear you, but you don't hear us because you don't acknowledge when we say, yeah? Or? I will ask Ferenc the question. So the question would be, in a sense, with the agglomeration of data, do you think, or would you imagine that some kind of an interactive way of presenting the data that could help navigate through the content? Would that be, because you're talking about adding information, would you imagine kind of a, let's say, digital way of presenting, or something in this sense of your further research?
I like it. Yeah. So, no, I have not a real answer to this discussion, because, like, we, of course, it could be. I can imagine completely to have like a interactive interface and to develop in this format. This I will keep you updated about that. I have no idea. I have no idea. Which is sure that it will take even more time to work on that, because actually with all the changes that we can see in this segment of global economy, all these creation of enterprises and destruction of factories, etc. All these cycles for centuries. It's pretty complicated. So it would be kind of a genealogy of, different big companies. It will be something very complicated, so it must be different from this world map. It would make sense, for example, to call it a map. It would be a very complex diagram, not a map. But, not a geographical map in that sense. That's for sure.
I used it once, your map, in a book reading presentation where we discussed a book, and it was super useful because kind of when you want to stress certain dates, when you want to emphasize certain things and you know which you want to discuss, then it's super clear for me. It was really interesting how it can be used to talk about specific issues that you place on the diagram, but kind of when you look through the specific theme, you can pinpoint to different localities, to different graphs, and bring this out very clearly, which I found really useful and interesting, just as a comment.
Thank you, Ivan.
So it seems that we have technical issues that might take more time, which is a total pity, but I would maybe suggest that we then, if we don't have questions from the room, for FERENC basically, then, and if we do, maybe we can continue. Otherwise, I would suggest that we have a break until 7 p.m. When we restart the whole thing and hope that the hybrid conference is good to us.
Okay.
Thank you, Ferenc. Thank you, Dale. And see you at 7 p.m., everybody.